Hi, I'm Erik Jones, and you're listening to Verse by Verse. In the 14th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul addresses some issues the Corinthian church needed help with. In the first two-thirds of the chapter, he addressed the issue of tongues and how that gift, if given, should be properly used in the church. Then, in the last third of the chapter, he transitions to the issue of weekly church services. The Corinthians had become very lenient and disorganized in how they were conducting Sabbath services. Apparently, they were letting anyone and everyone get up in front of the congregation and read, teach, or share some idea. People were also speaking other languages that no one could understand. It seems their services had little order, format, or decorum. Paul went on to give some specific instructions on how to order services in verses 27 through 32. But then, after giving these instructions, he went on to give a more general principle that they could use to determine what was and wasn't appropriate at church. Let's read that principle, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33. Paul writes, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints." This verse provides a powerful principle that continues to guide God's people today. Simply stated, the principle is that the environment that results from God's presence and blessing will be peace, not confusion. Peace implies tranquility, order, harmony, and stability. Confusion, on the other hand, implies instability, disorder, tumult, commotion. So when we experience an overall environment of confusion and disorder, God's presence is not there. God's presence does not lead to that kind of atmosphere. Instead, God's presence leads to order and stability, peace. Paul was saying that as long as the weekly services in Corinth were characterized by chaos and confusion, disorder, God's presence and blessings weren't really there. They had to make changes. They had to change their culture to be in harmony with God's culture. And it appears they did do this. They had gone off track, but as a result of Paul's correction and admonition, they repented and changed. My friends, though this verse was given in the context of church services in the city of Corinth many, many years ago, the principle still applies today, and it can be applied to many areas of life. Yes, first and foremost, it should guide how we conduct services today. The environment of church services should continue to be structured, organized, and orderly. But the principle also applies to life in general. We can look at our personal lives and the environment within our marriages and families and ask, am I or are we characterized by confusion or peace, chaos or stability, tumult or harmony? If we honestly find the answer to be confusion, chaos, and tumult, well, then it's time to honestly reevaluate the situation and see where God is being left out of the picture and where His ways aren't being fully practiced. Because, if we're honest, that will be the core problem that has resulted in the bad environment. But when we make changes and apply His ways to our ways, the natural consequence will be God's blessings and a godly environment, one characterized by peace, calm, stability, and harmony. When God is present and His law and way of life are being practiced faithfully, it will always produce this kind of environment because God is not the author of confusion, but of peace.
Verse by Verse is a Life, Hope, and Truth podcast. Check out the show notes to find more free content like videos, articles, and booklets in our Learning Center.